So a very warm welcome to our final district plan hearings today, the 15th of March. I will now read the karakia. Whakataka hau ki te uru, whakataka hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ke uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atakura, e tio, e huka, e hauhu, ti hei mauriora. I would now like to invite some special guests to address us. So some alaikum to Mustana Āmua and Brother Ibra Sheikh.
Walaikum salam. I think Brother Braz saying a few words.
Your warm greetings and assalamu alaikum to everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most compassionate, and the most merciful. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all our esteemed guests, dear friends, colleagues, brothers and sisters. It gives me great pleasure to be able to join you this afternoon, even though as a consequence of time in which we are currently living, I shall be joining you remotely from Auckland, something that we have learned to appreciate during this time of COVID. It is that absence of physical presence that does not mean the distance apart. And I am most certainly with you all today, in both intent and spirit. This is also so very true when we speak about our honored 51 Shaheeds who were martyred on this tragic day 3 years ago. Although they may not be here with us physically, they continue to be with us in ways that we are still learning to understand. And in this regard, I wish to acknowledge the grace and the resilience of our affected families, whānau, and survivors. The event of the 15th of March 2019 will live forever in the memories we have of our loved ones, in the collective experience of our community, both locally and internationally, and in the future pathways we choose to take as a nation. The event of that day have inspired us all with a sense of purpose, dedication, and hope for future, not just future of ourselves or our families or our community, but rather the future of our country and the future of all of us. This, I believe, is a beautiful exposition of the following Islamic principle as given in the Holy Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And not equal are the good deeds and the bad. Repel evil with that which is better. And thereupon the one whom between you and him was hated will become as though they were a devoted friend. Quran 41:34. Each year, FIAN's direct activities, information sharing, and events around the country in order to share with the people of New Zealand the true and timeless message of Islam. The theme of this year's Islam Awareness Week, the message of love, peace, and unity, was launched last weekend in Christchurch, and further events will be rolled out around the country throughout the year. We do this to fulfill our duty as Muslims, and we do this to share the joy and the entitlement and the enlightenment Islam has brought us into our lives. And we do this in the hope that an event like March 15th will never, ever happen again. Not just for us, and our community, but for everyone else. No one is born with hatred. It grows in the darkness and feeds on the fear of ignorance. And this is why we stand against such hatred with knowledge, light, and hope. We hope these principles of love, peace, and unity become more than an ideal vision of how we see ourselves and our country going to future. We hope that these principles inspire the way in which we undertake this journey, that they may become means by which we walk, as well as the destination. We look ahead with hope. We pray for those who have gone before us, those who remain, and those yet to come. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibra. That was really meaningful. Nev Foster, you'd now like to address the council.
Look, thank you, colleagues. Mustenza, you didn't want to say anything as well, just before I do?
No, I didn't have anything prepared, but just remembering the shuhada, or the martyrs, and especially the verse which Brother Ibrar mentioned in the beginning, that in the Holy Quran as well, it talks about the fact that the martyrs are always alive in the sight of Allah. And one way I believe that they remain alive is through their remembrance. And that's why this is very important. A country or people who don't forget their history and remember their history and make it building blocks to progress. I think that country always progresses, and that's why these memorials and these remembrance events are very important. And also moving forward with education, fighting that ignorance which leads to such things. And for a number of years, our community as well, we've been holding different kinds of events, like for the past 2 following the March 15th attacks. In the month of March, we have been holding Meet a Muslim campaigns across the country. But this year, due to COVID, we were unable to do so. So we've been doing that over social media. And this today, we're also holding a special blood drive to show that instead of shedding blood of others, we should be shedding our own blood to help serve humanity. And those are the principles I think everyone lives by. So thank you very much for holding this, and I hope we can continue to progress as a country and keep always remember our history and learn from it and continue to progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibra and Mustensa, and thanks, Iona. What I was just going to do is to read out just the brief message that I've sent to a number of members of our Islamic community and ask them to share that. We've also posted that, so I'll just read that out and I'll send that to you later. It's a short message of araha and togetherness. Assalamu alaikum. Today we see many challenges headlined by the extensive disruptions and costs imposed by the result of the global pandemic, and now the Russian invasion of Ukraine, in which many innocent people are suffering and dying. We also reflect that 3 years ago today, we saw with horror the most appalling of hate crimes happen on our own soil, when 51 innocent worshippers were murdered at the Al Noor Mosque and the Linwood Islamic Centre. Other worshippers were wounded and families shattered. At this time, I want us to remember all the ongoing hurt and to reach out again to our Islamic brothers and sisters with constant araha. At that time, 3 years ago, we came together as a nation to reject hatred based on identifying difference in culture, religion, and race. We said that we are one. It's a message that we need to continue constantly to remind ourselves of and to model. There have been many beautiful occasions since of coming together to build friendship and understanding. I reflect on the great step forward that we as a nation have subsequently made in the establishment of the Ministry for Ethnic Communities. And I'm particularly proud of our Wellington Interfaith Council, beautiful people who bring together a wide range of faiths in friendship to promote understanding and appreciation of diverse faiths. Their great work was recognised last year in winning the King Abdullah II of Jordan World Interfaith Harmony Award. We also now enjoy a prayer by a member of the Interfaith Council at the beginning of our monthly council meetings. It reminds us of our diversity as a community and inspires us with words of wisdom and faith. Wellington City Council's strategic foundation adopted last year has 3 pillars: creativity, sustainability, and inclusivity. It's one of my great privileges as Mayor, when COVID allows, to attend a great range of events across the diversity of our ethnic and faith communities. It is in celebrating inclusivity in our diversity that we celebrate our shared humanity and confirm again that we are one. He waka eke noa. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Foster. So we are now going to have a minute of silence to stand in solidarity with the Muslim community, sharing in your pain. Thank you again. Thank you everyone for sharing in this really important moment, and let us hope that we can make more progress in the coming year to bring peace to all of our communities. So colleagues, we are now going to go to our Zoom rooms to hear public submissions from members of the public. So if you could go to the room that you've been allocated to, and just a reminder at 10 to 8 tonight, just to come back to this main room. Thank you very much, everyone. Kia ora.
Right.
Thank you very much, Stanza and Ibra. Thank you so much. Right, Sarah, you'll have to go to your room now.
And Councillor Foon, you'll need to move to your meeting room as well. Oh, she's gone.
So everyone here now?
It's everybody, yes.
Oh, wonderful, thanks. Heidi, look, would you mind sending a message to the other facilitators just to give everyone their full amount of time, even though we're running late?
Already on it. Yeah,
okay.
Already done.
Thank you, Heidi. Oh, look, kia ora koutou, well, a very warm welcome, and thank you very much for waiting patiently while we felt we really needed to mark this very significant day in our history. So basically what we're going to do today is that you have the 45 minutes that we had allocated. If you could just quickly introduce yourself, and then everyone will have 5 minutes in which to address the key points of their submission, and then the rest of the time we can have questions and discussion. So kia ora koutou, Iona Pannett, Chair of the committee and one of Tokihino's ward councillors. Henny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Kia ora koutou, ko Penny Griffith ahau, and thank you for the opportunity of being part of this forum.
Wonderful. Jay Hadfield.
Kia ora koutou, my name is Jay Hadfield. I'm with the Capital and Coast District Health Board.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Xanthi Torrens. I'm also with the Capital and Coast District Health Board. I am the Spatial Planning Manager here.
Warm welcome. Chris Thompson.
Yeah, kia ora, Chris Thompson.
Thank you. Wayne. Sorry, we can't hear you, Wayne. Sorry, the wonders of technology. Still no volume.
Is that better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Yeah, we're having huge technical problems here this afternoon, so it's a second attempt to get on. But not your problem. I'm Wayne Scott. I'm the executive of the Aggregate Inquiry Association.
Fantastic. Now, is it Dinesh Sukha?
Yep, I'm Dinesh Sukha, just a homeowner in Brooklyn, and it's my wife, Manisha.
Hi.
Never just. Thank you. Mark?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I couldn't get my video to go, but I live in Hobson Street. I'm a resident here.
Great, thank you. Kate?
Kia ora, sorry, camera was off. I'm Kate Pascal, team leader in the district plan team at Wellington City Council. So just here as officer technical support.
Very important. And I'd just like to introduce Councillor Tamitha Paul, Deputy Chair of this committee. Councillor Paul is unwell at the moment, but is listening and taking everything on board. So thank you, Councillor Paul, for giving up your time. Heidi?
Kia ora koutou, I'm Heidi Mueller from Democracy Services.
Wonderful, thank you. Right, who would like to go first? And what we'll do is that I will just hold up my finger when there's 1 minute to go. So just so you know that you've got enough time to cover all your material, and then questions and discussion are extra to that. So is there anyone that would like to start? Shall I pick someone? Jay?
We're happy to start.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we are here representing Capital and Coast District Health Board, and we know we occupy a really important site here in Newtown, and we're really pleased to have this opportunity to participate in the guiding documents, because we think it's really important that we are making a positive contribution to the urban environment. We're expecting significant development at our site over the next decade as we transition to Health NZ, and so the scale and nature of the services that we provide as a tertiary health facility are likely to change over that time.
Cool. And I'll just very quickly run off the kind of key points of our submission now. So in our submission, which we've provided, we note that we're really keen to make sure that the height limit areas that are included in the draft plan are aligned with existing buildings in the future master planning documents that we've provided to officers. We note that there are some, we have some questions around one in particular that's outlined in our submission. We note that the Ewart Hospital that we operate at the end of Coromandel Street is currently under a general residential zone, which seems out of step with both the zoning around and the approach for the rest of the hospital site, which is given the hospital zone. And we're requesting that the hospital zone be applied to that site as well, with a height limit of 21 metres. I believe that's height area 5, in line with the rest of the plan. We're also seeking that residential and residential care be added to the permitted activity list, or the hospital activities in the hospital zone, to give us the flexibility for potentially providing things like accommodation or residential services for our staff. We note that housing is a really big challenge for us, for our critical workers particularly, and attracting and retaining staff is difficult for us, partly because of that reason. We have some concerns which are outlined in the submission around the shift from controlled to restricted discretionary as the activity status for a couple of the rules. We're concerned at the uncertainty that may create in our planning for that development that Xanthi highlighted that we see coming in the next few years. We support at a high level Te Hopai's submission that you've already heard, changing their designation from general residential to medium residential, and we see that being a positive step in reducing the potential tension between our site and theirs. We think there's more work required to understand what implications of the interface between the hospital zone and how a medium residential zone would apply to that site. But certainly going from general residential to medium residential is a positive step, and keen to talk to officers more about how that interface will work. And then just overarching, we want to give support to the increased density that's enabled by this plan, particularly in the areas that are around a hospital. As I noted, we have a real challenge attracting and retaining staff, and housing is a big part of that. So areas like Newtown, Mount Victoria, Mount Cook, and further into Berhampore and Island Bay as mass rapid transit is rolled out. Those are areas where our staff could live, and it will make it easier for us to bring staff to site without them requiring a car as well, which is good in terms of the environment, but also in terms of the need for car parking on our site. So I think that's the high level points of our submission, and keen to discuss any of the more detailed points that councillors have questions around in the later stages of this meeting.
Thank you very much. You were incredibly succinct. Really appreciate that. And also, sorry, I should have just acknowledged all the hard work you're doing as part of the COVID response.
Yes, our team's working very hard. Thank you.
Yeah, and for those of us who do have COVID, we are particularly grateful. All right, Mark, would you like to go next?
Yes. Now, has Hayley got my video to show, or will I just play what I've got here?
Give me a second and I'll just share my screen. Won't be
cool.
Hopefully you can see that now.
Yep, if that's playing. So this is just to give everybody an idea of what we're talking about. It's the red area is showing at the bottom of Davis Street and Thorndon Quay, and this is the flooding that happened in July of last year. You can see there Wellington Girls College is overflowing onto Hobson Street, and also overflowing here onto Motoroa Street, so both sides of Wellington Girls College, where they have intensified the land. I don't know if you're aware, they've put a whole bunch of prefabs onto the existing bare grounds that they had. And we're not suggesting that that's the cause of this, but certainly when you cover land up, as the council knows, the land won't absorb the water as much. So this was just footage to give everybody an idea of what's happening at the moment with the stormwater infrastructure as everything exists. And you'll see the consequences of it towards the end. That's a picture of a stormwater overflow. It's billowing out of the pipe underground, and that's another stormwater sump of a neighbour's, water's just gushing out of it. And this is the consequences of the flooding. This is a shop in Thorndon Quay, completely flooded out. Now, we've lived here for 20 years, and this is the third time this shop has flooded like this. I brought this to the attention of Wellington Water, and they said to me that it was an extreme weather event coupled with a high tide and the consequences of sea rise due to global warming. You'll see in this last clip here that I've shown when the high tide was, because I thought, well, let's just check whether that's true. And you can see that the high tide was at, what was it, 3:46. Is that what it was? Let's have a look here. High tide was at 4:26, but this flooding happened at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So we'd suggest that it's not anything to do with tides. This was an extreme event that the stormwater system couldn't cope with. So all we're concerned about is that the current infrastructure can't cope, and that we need to think carefully before we increase density, particularly in this Hobson Street precinct. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your time.
You are all very succinct. Thank you so much. We'll have a lot of time for good discussion. Right. Dinesh, would you like to go next?
Yep. So our submission is just on the significant natural area that's been applied to our section. And we're not totally against it, but it's just how it's been applied. We feel like the control of our land has been taken away by that proposal. And we've noticed that our neighbour has just cleared a few trees and made a little path down, and he's been excluded from that, getting that applied to his section. So we also note there's a big reserve below our section, which is a significant natural area, and by removing that from our section, it won't have any adverse effect to the environment. Also, we feel that there's a whole lot of unknowns with this being applied. We're not too sure what we can and can't do, and the sort of the costs associated with it. Yes, it's more just the unknowns. So that's basically.
Oh my goodness, you're amazing. You've got something to teach councillors. Thank you so much. Right, now, Penny, would you like to go next?
Yeah, kia ora, can you hear me okay?
Things are, yes, that's wonderful, thank you.
Great. Yeah, I mean, my submission was a one-pager and covered some general queries around intensification and the inappropriateness of applying type 4B zoning to certain little streets in Oriental Bay. I hope this doesn't sound like a NIMBY sort of submission, but I'm actually a beneficiary of intensification from the end of the 1950s. I live in a 1960 apartment block, and I moved back to Wellington last year after living 20 years in the South Island, and it's been an interesting time to come to grips with living in a new area of town. And so the district plan proposals were a really good trigger for getting to know my locality really well. And I've walked every road and footpath within 3 to 4K of where I live. And I feel as an older person that I really want to question the appropriateness of the 6+ stories in the narrow little streets that are proposed as being within the walkable distance for high density development. When I walk around here for various reasons, I can't visualize 6+ story buildings. It's very steep and unstable land. I see washouts on the footpaths and rock slips behind some of the buildings around here. And I've set out in my submission both specific hazards like flooding from streams and overflows, and the negative impacts on building larger buildings in front of attractive smaller buildings. And so I think that's fairly clear, but I don't think, given the nature of the terrain here, that it will be affordable housing if that's one of the main goals of this particular zoning. And council's own description of Oriental Bay already is dense urban. And so I want to know, I don't know if the discussion part will cover this, but is there a goal or a limit to the intensification plans, either of central government or of the council? I've looked at some of the central government documents and I can't see anything there. So, you know, how much intensification is enough, given that Oriental Bay is already over 3 times the average urban density? And so that's really just talking around my submission, and I hope that the specific points that I raised in my submission will get covered off by council staff and councillors. But finally, just to wrap up, as a member of Historic Places Wellington, I want to say how grateful I am to them for speaking to the heritage aspects of the plan, and I'm proud to be a member of that group too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very clear. Chris Thompson.
Thanks very much. So I'm here as a citizen of Wellington. I'd like to start by thanking the council and the councillors for providing opportunities like this. Obviously, different people are going to have different views and different interests, but I think it is quite important that we have the opportunity to air these and hopefully get a bit closer to something like a consensus. I do think it is quite a challenging job that the council does have to balance different values or different goals. So goals like increasing the supply of housing, preserving some heritage value, access to the environment and so on. Nevertheless, I do think it is possible to get an appropriate balance, but unfortunately, I don't think the draft plan, as I understand it now, quite gets that balance right. I know the Āmua Valley area better than other places in Wellington, so I'll talk specifically about that. As I understand it, the current draft plan allows for buildings of heights of 21 metres across a large proportion of the Āmua Valley. And I think in some places that will be absolutely appropriate, and it's absolutely right that the Āmua Valley plays a part in intensification and increasing the supply of housing. But I mean, the Āmua Valley is a valley, quite obviously, and it is quite a complex geography. And I don't think that building heights of 21 metres across the valley are feasible at all. And the main reason for that is an issue that has come up time and time again of access to sunlight. I think sometimes when you talk about the importance of sunlight, people treat it as a sort of nice to have like a view. I think it is far more important than that. I think access to sunlight makes for a healthy home along with other things like insulation and ventilation. I think the very real risk is that unless we treat these sort of concerns seriously, if we do intensify in this sort of broad brush way, we're going to have a very negative effect on people's mental well-being. So I suppose to sum up and to keep it brief, absolutely it's appropriate that we intensify. We really do need to increase the supply of housing, but it does need to be done in a sort of more fine-grained way, in a more nuanced way, to ensure that important values like access to adequate sunlight are taken into account. Thanks.
Thank you, very clear. And last, Wayne, welcome again.
Thank you. Hope you can hear me now. Good. Yeah, so I represent the Aggregate Quarry Association. I'm also a Wellington resident. I'm talking today really on behalf of the quarry sector at large. Wellington, like many cities in New Zealand, has a real problem with supply of aggregate. It's a growing city, well, maybe not as quickly as Auckland, certainly is growing. And we're looking, I think, for another 55,000 residents up to 2040, which equates to about 15,000 dwellings. And all the infrastructure, schools, everything else that goes with that. It's really important that in this district plan that council considers what Wellington is going to do for the supply of aggregate, particularly if we're going to keep housing affordable. At the moment, we have 2 quarries within the Wellington district and 1 close by in Lower Hutt. They are struggling to supply the 2.5 million tonnes we currently use in Wellington a year, and will certainly struggle as we grow as a city. So it's really important that in the district plan we provide for expansion of our existing operations where practical, and that's probably only the 1 quarry, Horokiwi. Expansion of Kiwi Point is highly unlikely, and we'll do a little bit of recycling and a little bit of production there, but primarily within this district plan, it's Horokiwi Quarry, so we need to certainly provide for that to continue, that stuff to continue. And secondly, identify where the next quarry will be to supply the district. There is quite an endowment of aggregate around the Wellington district. Unfortunately, a lot of it has houses on it already, but there are pockets of aggregate that we need to identify, and we need to protect that in the plan so that it is not sterilised by optimal planning. So that's really all I want to say, and happy to take any questions.
Another succinct submission. You are fantastic, all of you. Thank you so much for questions, for discussion between all the people who are submitting. And I'm sorry, my internet connection is also unstable, so I hope that you can hear me. Obviously, we're putting too much pressure on the broadband at the moment. Right, so I'm just wondering, okay, Councillor Paul probably just won't be up to asking questions. So I have lots. Can I start, and everyone will get a question, and hopefully Wayne, as an environmentalist, when we designed the course, I did ask, well, this is the problem, you know, like this is a finite resource. You've talked about finding an alternative, but when we looked at that, it was very difficult to find where that could be, and it will be difficult to consent as well. So where do you think those alternative sites could be?
I think that you would have to look along the corridor with the existing corridor.
Sorry, I can't actually hear you. Are you able to speak up a bit? Sorry, maybe mine.
Sorry, it could be.
Might be mine too, my broadband.
Yeah, okay, I'll try and speak up a bit. Hopefully that's a bit better.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, it's probably going to be along the corridor of the existing quarries, Horikiwi and up to Belmont and the Lower Hutt. Okay. There's some parcels of land in there that I know there's been a little bit of work going on. And certainly there's very little housing in some of those areas. So realistically, that's where the corridor is going to be. There's a little bit of aggregate endowment north of the town, but realistically, I don't think it's going to be consentable. It's close proximity to houses and so forth, and probably wouldn't be a Guernsey. So I think within the district, it's probably going to be that corridor between the existing Horikiwi operation and the Belmont operation in Lower Hutt.
And there is enough to last the region for another 100 years, including all that, obviously, the infrastructure we do need to build?
The short answer to that is no. However, in the short to medium term, though, I mean, Horikiwi without expansion, I think, has only got 5 years of aggregate left. Belmont potentially 15 to 20 years. However, without Horikiwi in the mix, it comes down to about 10 years. So right now, it's actually a relatively short time frame for Wellington. And the alternatives are quite expensive, and obviously additional truck movements, congestion, the whole gambit, emissions as well. So it's really at a reasonably critical point for Wellington, because even if we were to go import aggregates from other parts of the lower North Island, the Wairarapa is also short of aggregate right now, and it's trying to get some from the Wellington quarries. And the Manawatu is having similar type problems, and final source aggregates as Starfield as it's making now.
I would probably like to have an offline conversation with you further. So
sure,
see if we can arrange that.
Yeah,
it's a critical issue. And in fact, actually, can I just ask another question? What is the future of the aggregate industry? Are greener alternatives being looked at? I saw that in your submission there was some commitment to maybe I read it online, around recycling of it.
Yeah, we're working at that point. Quarry now is going to have recycling at it, but the problem with that in this country is we don't generate a lot of construction and demolition waste. So the access to products that can be easily recycled is quite small. And even if you look at the larger countries in the world that recycle, the UK is one of the largest. They recycle pretty much 100% of all their construction demolition waste, but it only represents about 8% of their entire aggregate market. So at the moment, we recycle 2% of our market nationally is recycled products. We think realistically we might be able to get that to 6-7%. But it relies on, and once again, it's a cost exercise as well. At the moment, recycling in New Zealand is quite expensive compared to virgin aggregates. But ultimately, I think we're going to have to go down that path.
Yeah, and as you know, the government's got big plans for the waste sector. So, okay. Right, we will now move to the Great Aro Valley, an area I know well and love, given we've got two submitters from there. So I guess my question really there is, given there's so many great things about the valley, how do we get more people to live there without undermining some of the things that you've both spoken about?
Maybe I could start with some of that. I mean, I suppose there's a couple of aspects to your question, right? One is the sort of cultural aspect and one is the environmental aspect. One of the really attractive factors about the Aro Valley is it is a diverse community. There's still lots of students living here. There are families living here, retired people who are living here. I think it is important to preserve that. I think potentially intensification, increasing the supply of housing can be consistent with that, right? It provides more opportunities for people to live in the valley. But again, it has to be the sort of houses that I think people deserve, which I suppose links to the environmental aspect that, as you'll know, with the Aro Valley, the hills go up and down. There's already a number of buildings that are quite high. I think if you're to build high buildings up against the hillside or into the hillside, you're really not going to impact significantly on people's access to sunlight. It's more where the sort of valley dips a bit, where if you were to build at 21 metres, you're going to cast existing houses in shadow. And that's just not a pleasant place to live again. So again, it is possible to further intensify the Aro Valley, although it is already quite densely populated, but it does need to be, I suppose, done in a more fine-grained, sensitive, nuanced way that provides quality housing for everybody.
Okay, Kenny?
Sorry, are you, was that for me?
Yeah, well, just as well, like, how do we make sure that people are well housed while keeping the things about the valley that many people love?
Well, of course, I mean, I'm talking about Oriental Bay rather than...
Oh, sorry, Penny, sorry.
I mean, but there are similar issues around, I'm sure, around the steepness of the hills, and we're talking about similar regions or areas of Wellington in terms of the physical challenges of the landscape and geology, and where does the stormwater go, and I just think there are probably going to be some areas where you just say it's just not viable to build 6+ stories for really practical reasons, because it's extremely expensive to get around instability issues, and for council in servicing issues, just supply. It amazes me where some of the stormwater and water supply and sewage pipes go on these hillsides. That's just, amazing.
Thank you, and sorry, I did read your submission, so apologies. And of course, Hay Street might be seen to be like Devon Street. So there you go. Other people making submissions on the SNAs. Have you actually had a council officer visit you?
Yes, we have. We had.
And did you? Okay. Did
You're breaking up.
I'm breaking up. Sorry. If I just repeat that, did you find that the council officer was able to answer your questions?
They sent a couple of ecologists around to report back to the council, but it still leaves a whole lot of unknowns of what we can and can't do because of this. And in terms of developing land or building anything, we still don't know what we can and can't do, and what the costs are going to be to us.
And I guess what concerns us is that our neighbour has similar vegetation, but they're not classed as an SNA. And we're up by the Brooklyn turbine, and there's quite a lot of reserve already around the area. So we just feel it's not fair to then have our section classed as a SNA when no one else in our neighbourhood does.
Okay. Right. Look, I don't know what the technical answer is on that, but we need to get some more information so so that is clearer. Thank you. I'll just see for any other councillors. Right. Now, the DHB. I'm just interested. How do you think it would be possible to build affordable housing that you're talking about? And I appreciate you're not a building expert, but some of the worries have been around gentrification, just because the land value is high. So what's your kind of view on that? Is the hospital prepared to put up some money? Appreciating you probably don't have much.
So affordability is certainly one issue, but the message that we get from staff is the availability of housing is as much of an issue as the price. The Newtown market in particular is extremely constrained in terms of supply. Obviously that has impacts on price as well, but we have staff who, medical professionals who are on relatively good salaries who can afford housing, who are not able to get housing because there's nothing available. That's particularly the case for our senior medical officers who may be coming from other cities or overseas, bringing a particular clinical specialty into the hospital, who may choose not to come, and this happens, or who choose not to come to Wellington because they can't get housing near to the hospital. They have quite specific, they like to live very close because they can get called in to the hospital at very short notice. In terms of what our role is in the housing area, obviously we're not a housing provider and we don't want to be providing housing, but we are having some very productive conversations with the Ministry for Housing and Urban Development, Let's Get Wellington Moving, and the Urban Development team at Wellington City Council about what the opportunities are for partnership in the space, and the work that Council is doing at providing housing for critical workers has certainly benefited us, and that is a pathway that we're looking at in terms of how can we support Council to continue those sorts of projects. Obviously the changes that the plan is proposing in the suburbs around the hospital will make it easier for future development of those types of projects, and then the general uptake in development and increasing supply helping as well.
And particularly the more highly paid health professionals, they want to live in apartments?
So a lot of those coming from overseas, they come from places where apartment living is very common, and the nature of health work, particularly at the moment in a very labour constrained market, is that people are spending a lot of time at work and they don't necessarily want backyards to look after as well. Or I can't obviously speak for really any of our staff specifically, but I think that the type of housing, we're a very large organisation, and across that there will be staff who are interested in all types of housing.
Okay, and obviously there will be a concern for the lower paid health workers as well, who will need affordable housing.
Yes, yep. And that's where the critical worker accommodation projects come in. Sorry, I just can't remember the name of that scheme that you're running.
Do you feel that the private market can deliver that, or do you think government really needs to come in to build that affordable housing? Sorry, did you get that? My internet connection's terrible.
Yep. No, we got that. So I mean, I think the specific response is not really up to us in terms of our role. We are here saying that we need more housing. I think you need all solutions really on the table. The challenges is very significant, and yeah. I think, do you have anything else on that one?
No, I think that covers it. Yeah.
Okay. And Mark,
sorry, just thinking, I think the other issue is the transportation. So as long as there's good public transport to serve places that are further away, then that's part of the equation and the balance that people weigh up as well. And so what kind of place they want to live in, the proximity, that's all, you know, in balance.
There are between 4 and 5,000 staff.
Sorry.
So there's 4 to 5,000 staff that work at Wellington Hospital every day, and so that at that scale, the solutions need to be a bit of everything, really.
Okay, and I presume all of your staff are committed to healthy ways of living, so biking, walking, public transport is your preference.
Yes, that's certainly our organisation's preference.
Right. Okay. And sorry, just last question before we hopefully get onto a bit of discussion. Mark, very familiar with your part of the neck of the woods. I spent a lot of time there in my teenage years. Do you think it's very likely that it would be redeveloped?
You mean Hobson Street?
Yeah.
Redeveloped as in high rise?
As in apartments, yeah. Will people sell?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Properties are so expensive in the street. Would somebody knock down, I mean, the sections aren't that large. Ours is, I don't know, 297 square metres, so it's not huge at all. You'd probably have to buy multiple properties at a couple of $1 million each. I don't know if a developer would want to bowl an old villa that's been done up, as a lot of them are on Hobson Street. And I would suggest that pretty much everybody in this area would think it was a terrible shame to do that. You'd lose the character. I would have thought there's far better areas to put up high rises. Thorndon Quay, for instance, is quite capable of having plenty of high rises.
Except it's very earthquake prone. In fact, we put some hazard restraints around that because of its earthquake prone status.
I mean, we're not talking, I mean, you're talking 6 stories potentially in Hobson Street versus, I don't know what you can do currently on Thorndon Quay, do you?
Kate, it's 4 stories, isn't it? You there, Kate?
Yeah. Under the operative plan, I think it's a bit higher than 4 stories. I can't recall the exact figure, but it is zoned central area, so it would be higher than 4 stories.
So I just thought we put some. I thought we'd put some restraints on it because of that, though. Okay, anyway, we'd just be doing
for the draft plan we've not increased the heights like we have in other parts of the city centre. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, but sorry, if you could remind me of what height we did go to, that would be at some future point. That would be
yes,
fantastic.
I can do that.
Okay, thank you. Look, you've all made fantastic submissions, which we've read. Are there any questions that you want to ask Kate? You're very lucky to have Kate in the room because she has been one of the main drivers behind this plan, particularly people who've got NSNA, or that you want to ask of the submitters, like just ask of each other of something that just came up that might be useful or interesting. This has been really, really, really valuable. Shall I just start the ball rolling? SNA, Kate, are you able just to, I know this isn't your particular specialty, but just around the constraints if we classify a bit of land as an SNA?
Sure. So the rules in the draft plan, they do allow the ability to maintain vegetation that is classed SNA. So that would include sort of trimming and maintenance. It does restrict further clearing of vegetation and the ability to create tracks and those types of things. It doesn't sound like that's probably something you'd be looking to do on your property, but at a general level, there are some. I guess the ability to modify an SNA is limited to necessary works to maintain the SNA, or remove dead or dying branches and that kind of thing. that's at a high level. That's what I can describe. But I guess if there were any further questions, I could take those and pass them on to those in the team that are dealing directly with that topic area. Happy to do that.
So does that stop any sort of development happening on that, if it's classed as NSA?
It depends. Obviously, not knowing your site, I don't know the configuration and where the area of SNA is in relation to other buildings that are already on the site. But I know the team has been working with other landowners who have aspirations to do some type of development on their site, so maybe put on a second dwelling or a granny flat or something, and where possible, looking at how that could be accommodated on the site. So if you were in a position where you had some plans to do something like that, then by all means get in touch with the team and perhaps could work through what would be possible. But I guess in terms of any sort of large scale development that involves a large portion of that SNA, then yes, there would be some restrictions placed on that. It would mean you'd need to apply for resource consent, essentially, and then have the impacts of that development on that SNA assessed through that process.
I guess what upsets us is that we really love the natural, the shrub that we have on our land, and we're very proud of it. And we get a lot of birds on our section because we're right next to the Karori Wildlife Sanctuary, or Zealandia. And unfortunately, those are things that were picked up in the report, that we had specific birds on our section, and we're encouraging that by having that shrub there. But what it's wanting us to do is kind of say to people, don't encourage native trees on your section, and it's really sad.
Yeah, look, and that certainly is not the intention to discourage it. And we do absolutely acknowledge that this is these are restrictions on private property owners, and that you're doing a great job by maintaining what is there. So there are requirements on us as a council to protect these areas of biodiversity, and that comes from both the Resource Management Act as well as our regional policy statement, which has been developed by Greater Wellington Regional Council. So I'm not trying to palm it off. I'm just saying that's the context in which we're making these proposals. But I do appreciate where you're coming from.
Thanks, Kate. Appreciate that.
Kate, I'm just wondering if you could address some of the issues that locals have come up with about access to sunlight, developability, just given Wellington's topography.
Yeah, and again, acknowledge those concerns. I guess we're again operating under some national direction that's pretty directive in terms of what council is required to do, providing for intensification at quite a large scale across the city. What we've done in the draft plan is we have tried as much as we can to make sure those amenity concerns are covered off to the extent that they can be, whilst also making sure we're providing for the capacity across the city that is needed. There is provision in there for daylight access. So at a minimum, you must have basically a window and an external wall. And sometimes what we see in developments is that we get what we call windowless rooms, and that is absolutely something we don't want to be seeing. So we want to make sure that people can at least get some daylight in their space. And there are also Building Act requirements around sunlight access, daylight access. So we can only go so far in the district plan in terms of what requirements we can put on developers, because in terms of some of those internal amenity requirements, because it actually falls under the Building Act. So there are definitely some, I would say there's some improvements that need to be made in that Building Act space, and that's something that that is acknowledged. We also have a set of design guides, which does where a development requires resource consent, as many of these 6-story developments would still need to get resource consent. there are some design requirements that would need to be assessed using those design guides. So if you haven't had a look at the design guides, they are part of the district plan. So I would encourage you to have a look at those. It does push the boundaries a little bit further than we're able to through the specific requirements in the district plan.
I wonder if this is a good point to ask, is there a specific goal for intensification? I've not been able to see any figures anywhere, either in central government's documents on, you know, what is there a goal or a limit that can reasonably be expected?
So there's not, I wouldn't suggest there's a goal or limit or as such, but for us, for Wellington City, we know that we have a shortage of between 4,500 to 12,000 houses over the next 30 years. And that's why we have, through the spatial plan process and this district plan, we have upzoned or proposing to upzone a lot of areas across the city. Of course, then the central government brought in their changes to the RMA at the end of last year, which would expand that intensification further beyond the areas that we had identified in the spatial plan. And yes, Councillor Paul, you're quite right. There is also an existing shortfall as well, as we know, across the city. So what was I saying? Yeah, so the government has made some changes to the Act, which basically requires that council provides as a permitted activity in the district plan. This isn't yet in the draft plan, but it will be coming through in the next phase in the proposed plan. So we have to permit 3 dwellings on a site of up to 3 stories. So that's as of right. So that then expands that intensification further than the areas that we have already identified. So we know what we need in terms of housing for the city, but there is a clear directive from central government that we need to be providing for as much capacity as possible. So hope that answers your question. And there is some information. It may be a little bit tricky to find, but there is some information on the Planning for Growth website around some of the detail around how much housing we need and what would be enabled through the certainly the spatial plan process. What's shown in the spatial plan, but it doesn't include those additional requirements that have come through most recently from central government.
Thank you. So just last question, Chris.
Yeah, so this is a couple of questions of clarification for Kate. I mean, I take it that there's a difference between access to daylight and access to sunlight. So under the current rules, all you need is a window facing south that gets some access to daylight, but no sunlight whatsoever.
Yeah, so there's no specific requirements around sunlight. That's correct.
I mean, I certainly appreciate that there's constraints about what you can and can't do given the direction from central government, but I suppose it's reasonable to expect you to work within those constraints to pick up the local concerns. So I suppose I wonder whether it might be as a sort of practical solution to think about staggering some of the heights running north to south so that you can build much higher, but in such a way that, you know, as you move backwards south, each house gets at least some opportunity for sunlight.
Yes, I guess that is a consideration. We still do have that requirement of enabling at least 6 stories, however, so that my words are going to be confusing here, but at a minimum, the maximum height would be 6 stories. I should have mentioned, of course, we do have the recession plane requirements, so that does provide for basically a building envelope, which would provide. It probably, to be fair, doesn't go as far as you're suggesting you would like, but that is designed to ensure that there is that houses aren't unduly shading neighbouring properties. But of course, with the building heights increasing, that is a more permissive recession plane to allow for the extra height. So that would be a step back from the boundary and then up a certain height and then angling in to allow for that sunlight access.
Thank you very much. Look, sorry, honestly, there's just so many interesting conversations to be had here, but we have run out of time and need to go to the next session. So can I just give a big thanks to all of you. You've provided valuable insights, raised some good questions, which we will respond to and definitely take on board your submissions. Thank you very much and have a great evening.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Heidi, how many public submitters have we got in here? So it's just a bit difficult to see everyone.
So we've got Felicity, Shelby Stoneburner, Stephen Paws, and Tegan and Polly.
So we have everyone.
Yes. Shelby might be joined by a couple more people, I think.
Oh, fantastic. All right, so what we're going to do, a big warm welcome to you all. Really looking forward to hearing your submissions, read them, so should be a good session. So if we could all just do a quick introduction. Councillor Calvert, we'll start with you.
I'm Councillor Calvert, Diane.
And where do you live? Or where do you represent?
I didn't do this last time. Wharangi, Onslow Western.
Kia ora. Shelby, welcome.
Nā Kaimanaki o Te Wānapiki, formerly known as Full Hill Protectors. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you just will need to come a bit closer to the computer, I think.
Okay, cool. And I'm joined with Logan Samuelson and Emily Stevens. If y'all want to introduce yourselves.
Emily.
Kia ora, I'm Emily. I'm a cat owner. I have an indoor cat, and I'm just here to speak from that perspective.
Kia ora, I'm Logan. I do some volunteering with Nā Kaimanaki and am a master's candidate at Victoria University of Wellington in environmental studies, and we'll be doing some research in Waimapuhi Reserve. That's all.
Fantastic. Thank you. Tegan?
Kia ora, I'm Tegan. I work for Generation Zero and I'm here to represent a city for people alongside Polly, which Generation Zero is a part of.
Kia ora. Felicity?
Kia ora koutou, I'm Felicity Wong for Wellington's Character Charitable Trust.
Thank you. Sarah? Sorry. You're on mute.
Oh dear. Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm an Eastern Ward Motukairangi councillor and the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Tim?
Hi everyone, I'm Tim Johnston from the District Plan team. So I've been part of the team here at the City Council working on the draft district plan.
Stephen, sorry.
Oh, no, all good, thank you. Steve Paws. I live in Nio with my partner and little one. Just here speaking for myself.
Never just. Right, Nicola.
Hi, I'm Nicola Young, Wellington City Councillor representing Lambton Ward.
Rebecca.
Rebecca Matthews, Wellington City Councillor, Wharangi, Onslow Western Ward.
Thank you, Liam.
Kia ora everyone, Liam Hodges, Chief Planning Officer at Wellington City Council.
Heidi.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Heidi Mueller from Democracy Services.
The Mayor.
Kia ora everyone, I'm looking forward to the conversation. Mayor Andy representing all of the city, sort of.
Thank you. Now, our wonderful Deputy Chair, Tamitha, is here and listening, but she is ill at the moment, so she is sacrificing her valuable time just to listen in, but needs to rest as well. And kia ora, I'm Iona Pannett, Chair of the committee and also Ward Councillor for Pukehino. Right, so what we're basically going to do is give everyone 5 minutes to just highlight the points from your excellent submissions, and then there will be time for some questions and discussion, and we hope to finish by 6 o'clock for people to have a bit of a break. And of course, there are always chances for people to have conversations later on offline. So is there someone that would like to go first? And we're not scary. Felicity, good on you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Wellington's character made 4 submissions on 4 separate points, one on heritage and character housing, the Johnsonville train line, Kandala Village Centre, and Oriental Bay Heritage Report. But today I will focus on Onslow and Newtown, 2 suburbs with really different histories and character. And I just want to pick up that conversation in the previous session with Kate about the new MDS rules adopted in December. As for the NPSUD, of course, there's big qualifying matters for heritage and character. And what we're asking for is that the council use its discretion given to it by Parliament to apply those qualifying matters in the right places. So just turning to rapid transit, if I may, the blanket 6 stories based in Onslow is based on a poor attempt to rebrand the Johnsonville train, suburban heritage train, as rapid transit, and that's absurd. And our submission talks about why it's absurd. You know, it's constrained by the single track, the 3 passing lanes. You can't get more than 4 trains per hour on it. And you can't make it any quicker by investing in it, for example, making it passing bay at Simla or at Johnsonville Station. It's not possible. And it's lost money for very many years. From a climate point of view, you're lifting an enormous amount of steel from Wellington up the most steep gradient, more steep than any railway in the United Kingdom, unbelievably. It just doesn't make sense from a climate point of view, and that track should be perhaps repurposed as a busway or a cycleway. So it's not based on any analysis either by Kiwi Rail, Waka Kotahi, or the Regional Land Transport Committee. It simply isn't rapid transit under the definition in the NPSUD. And we wrote to the council last year saying that that analysis must be done about rapid transit, and we haven't seen it. Turning to Newtown, also on rapid transit, you know, development's been stymied there for a long time. It urgently needs urban development, and a whole lot of city investment is long overdue. But I think I hazard a guess that Let's Get Wellington Moving is now stillborn, and light rail is kind of yesterday's thing, and that's playing out in Auckland at the moment. So I would say that there is a very good alternative plan for upzoning Newtown around the retail area by red design. And I urge the council to look at that. I know you will look at it in your Section 32 report, but it would be much better, I think, if you looked at it now that MDS applies 3 stories everywhere, all over every suburb. And so if you like, you've got a sort of a safety valve on capacity, which you can use to not blanket upzone to 6 stories. And I would say, take a look at what Auckland's doing with their centres. You know, they're categorising them and then upzoning according to scale and size. And I think it's clear that Onslow's 2 villages, Ngaio and Kandala, are not a local centre in size and scale as proposed by the Wellington City Council. They're both neighbourhood centres, and our submission gave evidence on that point. I would just say that the special character of Kandala's village has been recognised by the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, by previous consultations with the community, and by a recent licensing court decision. And blanket zoning, so my conclusion on that point is that blanket upzoning of Newtown and Onslow to 6 stories is not warranted. On heritage and character, I just say the Bothamiscal report of 2019 had very good evidence about the extent of Wellington's character housing and recommended, 80% retained protection. Council's own staff recommended 50% of the inner heritage suburbs. And I would urge you to look at the evidence on that. Again, like Auckland Council is currently doing with their special character zones, which, different from Wellington, they are zoned single family homes, which is not the case in Wellington. Often that's something that's there's confusion about. So please use the provisions, use your discretion and look at the evidence. And I think we'll have a better outcome. And I just say in passing, look, well done on some things like affordable housing, social housing, and I think more needs to be done for students with Victoria University needs to repurpose the Gordon Wilson flats, not demolish it, for example. Thank you.
Thank you, very succinct. Who'd like to go next? Shelby, welcome.
Kia ora. So we put together a short little slideshow presentation. Is that all right to screen share, or do you want us to just have a kōrero? Sorry,
screen
what?
share. You can screen share. Yeah, definitely. Go for it.
Sweet. So I will do that now. Just let me. Alrighty. So we already did our introductions, but I'll just get straight into it. I'm here to kind of represent the group Ngā Kaimanaki o Te Waimapihi, which is formerly known as Polar Protectors. Again, ngā mihi for all of the councillors voting through the name extension back in November. That's like just really incredible, and thank you so much again for that. So today we're here to chat about cats, particularly cats in reserves, significant natural areas, and hilltops and ridgelines. So I think y'all are quite familiar with our group, but we're here to protect Waimapihi Reserve, which is bordered by Ora Valley, Highbury, and Brooklyn. So we've got around 200 Dock 200 traps around the reserve that are there to help protect Tonga, like our native manu, and even, crawling critters and things like that. And we've been going since 2014, trying to eradicate pests in the reserve to give these birds and all the Tonga who call that place home a fighting chance. So here's kind of some photos of the birds that we do have in the reserve. A lot of that is thanks to Zealandia, having the spillover birds. We actually, Melissa Boardman just spotted a Titi Punamu for the first time in Waimapihi Reserve a couple days ago. So that's pretty exciting. We also have birds like Kieke and Kaka and Hihi, Ruru, Titi Punamu, Totowai, and of course Kaka and Tui. We also have native moka and weta and skinks, as well as some really rare native freshwater species. But we also have some unwanted guests in the reserve. These are all photos taken from the Facebook group of people reporting cat sightings in the reserve. And this has been quite a common reoccurrence of, people who live around the reserve and have cats venture in, and during the day, but also mostly at night is when it's really important to keep them out of the reserve, because they predate on birds, really. And once something happens to the bird, it's really hard to kind of rehabilitate them. So our submission kind of suggestion is that we can try and keep cats out of significant natural areas, special landscapes, ridgelines, and hilltops. So that's the Eco R3 and the NFL R1. It's, there is talk about pest control in those places, but it's hard to kind of leave out cats as pests. You know, we're talking about New Zealand and Wellington being predator free, but it's not going to be predator free if there's cats allowing free roaming in those spaces. So that's what we're kind of here to Pūroro about. I just kind of wanted to do some explanation, and from the kind of trapping point of view, really from it, because there's kind of this interesting, I guess, I don't know, difference going on where there's trappers who are trying really hard to eradicate these pests, but then there's cats that are coming into the reserve and not and just not allowing for these birds to reproduce and live there. And we've done a couple things to try and fix these problems ourselves. The first thing that we did was the Dogs on Lead campaign, and now there's 90% of dogs in the reserve are on lead. So that's a really great success. And then we kind of changed our message to be more on cats. So we started with online surveys and flyers, and we started changing our signage around the reserve to not just having dogs on lead, but also keeping your cat at home. We also introduced focus groups. So we met with people of the community and just had open conversations with them to see, you know, what their views were on their own cats and how we can kind of collaborate and work together to achieve this goal. And then with that information and with some research, we produced a responsible cat ownership video, which Emily was the star of. And we've also recorded footage of cats throughout the reserve at night, during the day, and we've used GPS tracking collars to prove that these cats are there.
We've got less than a minute to go, Shelby. Is there anything you want us to do in terms of our district plan?
Yeah, so we want the district plan to basically include cats, really, when you're talking about predators and not leaving them out.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, we have some research and Emily's point of view about being a cat owner and transitioning her cat indoors. And basically our solutions that we have a couple of different solutions for it, which would basically be hard out, you know, you're keeping your cat indoors 24/7, or keeping your cat indoors only at night, or the city council, you know, leading a campaign to chat with the community to try and get cat owners on board with this, or fining people for having their cats in reserves in the significant natural areas.
Okay, thank you. That's really clear. We'll definitely have some discussion on that later, I'm sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Right, who would like to go next? City for People, would you like to?
Yeah, I'm happy for me and Polly to go next.
Fantastic.
Awesome. So our submission was quite long, so we're just going to speak to a couple of the points in it. I'm stepping in for Luke, who has COVID, sadly, at the moment, so he couldn't be here. So it's a bit of a last minute prep from me, but I'm really excited to speak to our points. So for those of you who don't know, a City for People, a coalition of Wellingtonian organisations who want a city built for people with thriving communities, green spaces, affordable housing, and public and active transport infrastructure that improves the quality of life throughout our city and enables people to live close to or sustainably access where they work, study, and socialise. So our coalition includes Generation Zero, which I'm a part of, Cycle Wellington, Parents for Climate Aotearoa, Renters United, Different Spokes Pōneke, and Sustainability Trust. And I'll get Polly to just speak to Sustainability Trust's involvement.
Kia ora koutou, ko Polly Griffiths-Tokuingwa from Sustainability Trust. We became part of the City for People because our vision is for a just and sustainable low carbon future for the Wellington region. We're on a mission to create sustainable, healthy homes for our community. We want everyone to have access to high quality of life with neighbourhoods that enable people to have low carbon footprints. Thanks, Tegan.
Kia ora, Polly. So the first point that I'm going to speak to is that we want the district plan to enable a diverse and varied range of housing typologies that meets the diverse and varied needs and preferences of Wellingtonians. This includes townhouses, papakaianga, co-housing, perimeter block housing, and more. Currently, there are many difficulties when building co-housing in papakaianga. One that the district plan can alleviate is difficulty applying planning rules to these co-housing projects. There is often confusion about fitting co-housing into planning rules, particularly rules around second kitchens, minor dwellings, granny flats, and sleep outs, and how they apply to co-housing projects. So it's really important that the district plan provides clarity for those developments, and that they work with, and that this Wellington City Council works with groups and developers with expertise in co-housing to ensure that the district plan can facilitate the easy construction of this type, and through that easy construction of more co-housing, there'll be more people's needs that are able to be met. We also have some recommendations to help enable perimeter block housing, including remove front setbacks in residential zones, remove side setbacks from the front 20 metres of the site, and remove height to boundary requirements in the front 20 metres of the site. So the second point that I'll speak to is supporting accessibility and universal design. So we really welcome the design guide policies on accessibility and support the city outcomes contribution consideration of universal design. There is a dire shortage of accessible housing. Only 2% of current housing stock is accessible, while 1 in 6 people need some adjustment to their house for it to be accessible. It is much cheaper to build accessible housing than it is to build inaccessible houses and then have to amend them later to make them accessible. So that's just one of the many reasons why it's so important to encourage accessible housing to be made and support that. Disabled people not only have a right to live in accessible and affordable housing, but they should also be able to visit the houses of their friends and family without barriers. And I think this is a really big issue at the moment, and one that affects my own social circles. We support placing greater weighting on universal design in the city outcomes contribution and creating an incentives program to make lift provision in 3-storey development less cost prohibitive. And then we also think the council should work with the central government to reform the building code to better mandate universal design. We see the building code as a really big part of, I guess, creating barriers or removing barriers. So it's really important that that is reformed. And I'll pass on to Polly to talk about circular economy.
Oh, kia ora, Tegan. Yeah, I just wanted to make a point in relation to the strategic objectives. I've worked for over 20 years on waste and resource management. So my geek topic is circular economy and waste. The purpose of the district plan is directed towards achieving sustainable management of natural and physical resources, and a circular economy is based on the principles of designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials, so resources, in use, and regenerating natural systems. And the council has already committed to integrating circular economy in the council's policy framework and the Te Atakura blueprint. So we're advocating that circular economy principles should be integrated into the strategic objectives so that waste is minimised and designed out of construction projects, and resource recovery infrastructure is put in place to manage any remaining waste. We need to recognise that the integrated nature of circular economy and not let it sit part of the waste strategy alone. There's an opportunity, particularly now with the waste management and minimisation plan for Wellington being updated this year.
Oh, great. So succinct. Thank you. Perfectly on time. Really appreciate that. So there'll be plenty of time for good questions. And last but not least, Stephen.
Thank you, Councillor. Good evening, everybody. Lots of really good points from Tegan and Polly. So I put in a submission around a number of items around the spatial plan, but I really just want to focus on 2 of them today. And following on from Polly and Tegan, they've covered off a number of the other ones I was interested in as well. So again, I speak on behalf of myself. I live in Nio with my partner and a little one. I really enjoy living in Nio, and I think there's a lot of opportunity in this area of the city. that needs to be looked at, particularly around transport and connectivity. So I think about the Johnsonville train line and what has been provided in the district plan, draft district plan so far. And I think it goes well, but there are things that we should be encouraging even more. So in terms of upzoning and making transport more accessible to people. One of the key, one of the Wellington City's key goals being first to zero. And one of the biggest greenhouse gas emitters from person to person is around their transport cost. So the district plan really should be focused on how do we get people into higher density living, closer to transport hubs, so we can enable that change. That will really make a big difference. So I look at my neighborhood, Nio, and there are single family homes all and around every single transport hub within Johnsonville line. I would disagree with Felicity saying that I would say it's a rapid transport line based on usage, and it has been limited because of the planning rules that have been in place for decades now. So getting and building and focusing on those transport hubs will really make a difference, and I'm really a proponent and supporter of upzoning those areas in and around the Johnsonville train line. I think in addition to all of that, other protections around heritage and tree protections and anything else around those inner city suburbs really detract from that change and that change in mode switch as well. And we really need to be focusing on giving people chances to live in places where they work and play, and focusing on getting those inner city suburbs in a place where they can be upzoned and be more accessible, as Tegan and Polly said, and focus on that. I wouldn't, I'll say in accessibility as well, by putting forward new topologies for housing. There's opportunities in sixplexes and fourplexes and other topologies where there will be accessible units without detracting in potentially the cost implications of having elevators and lifts and other things within buildings. So I think that needs to find a balance within the district plan, and ultimately those suggestions around the building code as well, where we can't make housing unaffordable to build because of some constraints around that. My last point is about simplifying the resource consenting process. There's a number of comments I put forward within my submission around discretionary and restricted discretionary activities, and the focus in particular topologies and particular residential buildings that we're proposing here, where we can really simplify that process. In my professional world, I know how long consent takes, and it's not the statutory timeframes that get it. It's usually 2 or 3 or 4 times that, and we can see that right now in Wellington City, that is just taking longer to process resource consents and other the whole consenting process. So I really push for the district plan to focus on moving more activities as permitted or controlled to help simplify that process, so developers and other people trying to build housing understand what the constraints are, their timeframes, so they can be budgeted and programmed effectively. My last point is upzoning and densifying a city doesn't guarantee housing. It doesn't happen overnight, but it gives it a chance. And I really hoping that's really what our future residents and future neighbors actually need. And that's me.
Thank you. You've all been very succinct and clear. So now we have 22 minutes for people to ask some questions or even have some discussion, polite discussion, of course. And I'm sure we'll get some great insights. So Rebecca and then Sarah, thank you.
Yeah, my question is for Tegan and maybe anybody else who wants to answer, but about the advantage of perimeter blocks and reducing those kind of front and side setbacks. And what do you see as some of those advantages?
Yep, so I'll start with, I'm definitely not as clued up on this as some of the other generation members, such as Luke and Susie, who couldn't make it sadly tonight. But I know that some of the advantages of that is that you can create more housing and more green spaces. you know, if anybody doesn't really know about it, I can flick you an article that I was reading before. But it's really cool to see how it allows you to create housing that has, you know, just like a really beautiful green space in the middle, which I would say, you know, builds more of a community feel as well, which is definitely something I'm always looking for myself.
Felicity, do you want to just make a quick comment?
Yeah, look, I've lived in perimeter block housing in New York, and it's absolutely fantastic, Councillor Matthews. I think what the problem that we've got here is, how do you transition from kind of suburban development that's existed for sort of 50 or 70 or 150 years? How do you transition from that style into the style that you and I would agree, you know, is a good thing for intensity? And I think that's the challenge, and I think that's what residents are asking for, a sort of a sensible kind of transition, not just not one that's kind of risky to social cohesion and other important things. Thanks.
I think we'll keep it as a rhetorical question. Sarah.
Oh, hi. Look, in the last session, there was a lot of discussion about one size doesn't fit all, and also about the importance of sort of working with communities to come up with what fits in that area. I'm just interested in hearing from anybody on that theme.
A few people want to have a go?
Saw Tegan's head nodding.
Yeah, sorry, I was like, do I need to raise my hand, or do I just
just go for it, Tegan.
Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I definitely think I think that historically we've probably relied a lot on this nuclear family model that doesn't apply to a lot of people today, and so that we need to make sure our housing kind of reflects that. And I 100% agree that the people who are impacted need to be the ones you know, co-designing these with people. So for example, when we're talking about accessibility, that needs to be co-designed with the disabled community. When we're talking about honouring like the cultural significance of view shafts and things from mana whenua, that needs to be done with mana whenua. It is, when we're talking about providing students housing and things like that, it's just so important that those communities are involved in that design process, and that means that process needs to be made accessible to them, which, you know, can be, I think, engaging with local council at the moment is quite difficult for a young person, speaking on my own behalf there. And so yeah, it's a kind of about how do you engage with those communities in a way that isn't just using their labour, especially when they're time poor, and, you know, money poor as well, like a lot of students and things, and making sure you're honouring what they've put into it as well by reflecting in the design that they've been heard and seen.
I guess I was also thinking about the acceptance of like the communities that are already there, and how do they see their community developing. But that's interesting because you've given it a really different twist, which is good.
Thanks. Andy, then Polly.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask a completely different question, but actually, Tegan, I'm going to ask you to expand on that a little bit, because one of the issues, and it really goes to what Sarah was just saying, it's one of the issues here we've got with the way in which planning is being done increasingly, and in which the government's directing us to do it, actually reduces the amount of community involvement in it significantly, if not eliminates it entirely. And how do we get ourselves around that? Now, it's probably not just for you, Tegan, but probably anybody else, how we marry up those challenges that essentially so much becomes just allowed as of right, that there is no ability for communities to be able to design their place, as only the person who's actually developing, or people who are actually developing an individual site.
Yeah, so I guess a point on that is, I think design guides would be like a really good way to make sure that the communities like needs are being reflected. And you know, when we talk about incentives for accessibility and things like that, I think that's kind of in, because obviously one of the current needs of the communities is more housing. So we don't want to make it really difficult for people to develop housing. We just want to, I guess, support and encourage them to build housing that can meet people's needs.
Stephen, do you just trying to get everyone to have a say? Stephen, have you got
Yeah,
a
I was going to add my 2 cents. I think, so before moving to New Zealand, I lived in Seattle, and they have a very complex design review process that takes 500 days. So that's the far extreme that we can't be heading down, right? Because it's not attainable, right? So I think obviously you have to find the balance between getting community input, but we can't have everybody turning into architects, right? So I think, like Tegan was saying, those design guides and getting influence from communities then early on in that process, so that the developers and others can have something to kind of lean upon as they look at the development, whatever it is, size and scale appropriate. So.
Okay, great. Polly. Oh, sorry, you're on mute, Polly.
Sorry. Someone's always got to do it. I was just going to add to what Tegan was saying, and just about the value of that community co-design process, especially in terms of kind of the shared spaces in these communities as well, and making sure they're providing what people, those bump spaces are going to be really important as we're kind of increasing the density of our housing to kind of bring people together. And it is time consuming up front, but I think in the long term it saves a lot of potential kind of division in communities, and we get better outcomes as a result.
Can I just ask my question now, because it's a question for you, Polly? So I've done not as much as you, but lots of work on waste, and as an environmentalist I'm a big believer in recycling and minimising use, and I've just been having a useful conversation with the aggregate people. There's some issues there about, like there's actually a limited supply. So how do you marry up the circular economy, reducing impacts on the environment, which are really devastating when we gather materials, with the need to meet human need and quite quickly?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Iona. People think that they are sort of mutually exclusive. I don't agree with that. I think if you apply circular economy principles, then you are basically working towards eliminating waste. What I've found from working in construction and demolition is that if you apply these principles from the design phase, you're going to have the best outcomes and you're going to minimize waste. And it also means that if we do need to kind of take any buildings down, we can repurpose those materials to use a new building. When I was in Scotland, a large proportion of aggregates were secondary and recycled. So in other words, they came from existing buildings that had reached end of life, and then they were and the technology is really readily available. It's not particularly high tech producing secondary and recycled aggregates, crushing and screening. They can be produced to high specification. Those specifications can be put into design guides and give the designers confidence to use them as well. So I do think there is a different way of approaching construction that can mean that we can have more housing, but address our waste issue as well.
Thanks. And we will get to cats. We will not leave you out. Rebecca, if you've got another point.
My question is about cats. So Shelby and Emily and team. So I guess, we've had a lot of pushback about the SNAs generally, about people that think that we're encroaching on their private property rights, and, quite a lot of concern. So I'm just interested in how I can sort of see them freaking out even more about us telling them about their cats. So what sort of approach do you think might work with the community to encourage kind of responsible cat ownership, like as your experience, Emily?
So something that Logan has found in his studies is that it's really good to lead with a cat safety message. So I can say from firsthand, as I learned more about conservation, it was a drive for me personally, but the fact of the matter is a lot of people just don't care about native animals and they never will. So if you point out, hey, your cat might get hit by a car, or hey, are you sick of your cat being poisoned every other week or needing stitches? Maybe you should consider this other very obvious route, you know? Yeah. Another thing to make it kind of less stunning, I think, for the public, if you were to introduce regulation, would just be to not continue to treat it like a taboo subject. So people, even in conservation, are really hesitant to speak about it because it is such a deeply ingrained part of New Zealand culture. And so we do need to start talking about the fact that indoor cats exist in other places of the world. It's the norm where I'm from. My cat's perfectly happy, it's not cruel, and things like that.
Is there time for me to also provide comment on that as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I just, for context, designed behavior change intervention that was targeted at cat owners on behalf of Ngāi So that was part of my master's program at VUW. So part of designing that was kind of digging into theory around behavior change, and just to kind of tie it back into your question. There's something called the spillover effect, which is basically a theory that says if you get people to take up a behavior change that is maybe perceived to be more feasible, then, you know, down the road, it just makes it more feasible to take up more difficult to implement behaviors. So one of those might be if you were to require people to contain cats indoors from dusk until dawn. Although it would be quite a shock and pretty difficult at first, it will make it easier for people to adopt to, I guess, stronger behavior changes down the road.
Yeah, it's happened in Vic.
Yeah, so one example that they cite in literature on this is Victoria, Australia. So I think it was something like, it might have been 2009. There was something like 30% of people kept their cats indoors from dusk until dawn, and then they implemented some regulation. And then by 2019, I think it was like 80%. So, yeah.
Thank you. Nicola.
Just really to say, first of all, I'm cat neutral, as my colleagues know. But I think probably the anti-cat and pro-cat lobby would probably be the most vociferous of any group that have ever. They're worse than the fluoride. They're worse than the fluoride people. So it would be a very brave council that took on the cats. I mean, maybe central government could do it.
Yeah, and we've experienced it firsthand on our Facebook group of cat owners and.
Oh yeah, so you know.
Yeah,
and it is both sides, you know. It's
yeah, and I'm a cat lover, as well. So it's I'm coming at it from both sides as well.
Sure.
And yeah, just trying to meet with people, have conversations, and make it more about their cat safety. Getting vets on board to talk about this, getting the SPCA on board to talk about this.
It's a great approach.
Yeah.
Andy.
Yeah, look, my other question is for Stephen and for Felicity in particular. So you both mentioned the Johnsonville railway line, and we've had quite a bit of feedback on that for months about whether it is or isn't a rapid transit system. Just wondered what kind of things that you would see that put it across the line for being this is rapid, or it isn't rapid.
I'll go first. So I think for me, I try to be practical about these things, right? So trains in the morning and in the evening, every 15 minutes, right? It comes at a regular schedule. It makes sense, right? And as I stated before, I look at how the areas around the train stations are zoned, and it's just completely insufficient for what the potential of that line could be. And so I hear Felicity's point around the neighborhoods versus town centers, or whatever it's called, but it's a opportunity to grow that area of the city and focus in on transport that is reliable and also gets people into the city every single day.
So if I were to characterize that, Stephen, you're saying that essentially the current frequency and capacity is sufficient in your books to make it a rapid transit system.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Felicity, do you want to just make a brief comment?
Yeah, I do. And thanks for the question. Look, rapid transit has a legal definition in the NPSUD, you know, rapid, frequent, rapid, fast, frequent, and reliable, and so on. And this simply does not meet that test. And you know, it is constrained. It can't go any faster. It is every 15 minutes. But look, I catch it all the time, and I'm waiting at Wellington Station when the dystopian announcement is made every morning at 7:30. The Johnsonville train is about to depart. Please board now. And there is no train at the station. It's too weird. So it's completely absurd. But I do agree with Stephen that there's room for upzoning. And I absolutely agree that in you know, around stations, there is some places that perhaps should be upzoned. So I don't disagree with that. But this is not rebranding the old train that I've been riding on since I was 10 years old and living in Johnsonville. It's not rapid transit. It's just silly.
Thank you both. I love the diverse views.
That's why we have these discussions. Sarah.
Talking about cats, there was an uproar and we just tried to make microchipping of cats, the done thing when you bought a new cat. But it's all settled down, but yeah, it's a touchy subject. But I wanted to ask Polly, because I know you work in an organisation that puts a lot of insulation into houses and is very focused on warm, dry houses. Do you think 2 hours of sunlight is kind of like a reasonable guideline? Because that's what I understand it is. And yeah.
I know you might have gone beyond my technical knowledge there,
I'm
Sarah. I'm so sorry.
Make a comment, but is there a comment about the sunlight?
It's basically a window with some daylight all day. Sorry, we've said 2 hours, but actually, of course, you get more than that as opposed to sunlight. And so basically, Sarah's asking whether we need daylight or sunlight into our houses.
And the quantum. It doesn't seem to be anyone who wants to answer, but maybe if there's no answer for that, we'll move on to Diane.
Okay, all right. That's fine. Diane, last question.
Thank you. And I won't talk about cats or the Johnsonville line. I've got firm views about that. But anyway, just a question about universal design, about how practical it is to make all new builds having to be built using universal design. And just, is that a possibility? I know we've heard some comments from some of the participants here. Well, they've got a view on that.
They did it in Stalin's Russia, USSR, where all the buildings look the same.
Not to look the same, I mean the design aspects, so like, you know, wide enough hallways and different things like that, from probably from an accessibility perspective.
I'd say I'm definitely no expert on this and building houses and things, but I guess just for me, it's just kind of like, why not? Like, what? Yeah, I guess you'd have to ask the people more involved in it, but it's just like, why not? It can definitely be done. You know, we have accessible houses, and it's easy to make them accessible first. So it seems like that's just the better way to do it. And when I think about it, I just think about the people who need the accessible housing, and it's just like, it just seems like, why wouldn't we, when it can benefit so many people?
Thank you.
Can I just ask a quick question? No argument. Rebecca and I have been banging on about this for years. Who pays though when it does become more expensive? And I know Stephen made a reference to that, making some compromise, but actually if we are to remove all barriers, housing has to be made accessible. So who does bear the cost, given that we know that many disabled people aren't on very high incomes?
Iona, can I just add another element to that?
Yeah, sure.
Because it was the element, Tegan, we had a presentation about our own Tika Āmua program, which is our affordable housing program, and the disabled access to that. And one of the criteria in the disabled access provisions is provision of car parking, which goes straight to the issue that, well, it goes to a sustainability issue, but also goes to the issue that Iona's raised about affordability. as soon as you put a car park, it's particularly in an apartment, cost goes through the roof.
Yeah, I think there wasn't for every single access, you know, you can have universal design without having a car park, but, you know, obviously many like wheelchair users, for example, are more car dependent. So, yeah, so I just want to jump in there.
Yeah, no, we're very passionate about it. So, yeah, no, Tegan, do you have a response to that? I mean, is it, so just be specific, is it the government that comes in and subsidises, the council? Is it private developers' responsibility or the people who go and live there?
Yeah,
or both?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, again, I don't know a huge amount about private developers and what their current costs are and things like that, but I think it would be awesome to see the government take some responsibility for that. Like, speaking as a disabled person myself, it is expensive to be disabled. So I think, you know, if we want a just and equal society, those costs should not be bared by the disabled community anymore. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's super helpful. Right, well, look, we have come to the end of our time. That's been fantastically useful. It just feels like we could talk for hours, actually, if there's just been so many amazing issues raised. Thank you for all the time that you've put into your submissions. You've worked hard, you've given up your free time. And so we'll take those on board, and of course are always available for more conversations. The councillors, go and have some dinner, and we will, and the staff and the submitters, and see you back at 7 o'clock.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillors, just turn off your videos and mute.
Kia ora koutou, ko Jildai Takuingoa. I am a councillor for the Takapū Northern Ward. Looking forward to hearing from you this evening. Kia ora.
Thank you. Phil.
Yeah, hi, I'm Phil Springford. I represent my family. We have some land in Wellington. So just keen to get our views across to the audience, please.
Fantastic. Kate?
Hi, I'm Kate Jensen. Kia ora. I've been living in Wellington for the last couple of years, and I'm really interested to see a city that's resilient and accessible and yeah, so on like that. So yeah.
Fantastic. Liam.
Kia ora everyone. Liam Hodges, Chief Planning Officer at Wellington City Council.
Heidi.
Kia ora koutou, Heidi Mueller from Democracy Services.
Thank you. And Maria?
Kia ora, my name's Maria. I live in the wonderful suburb of Ngaio. I'm interested in talking about significant natural areas. Thanks.
Thank you. And my wonderful colleague as well, Tamitha Paul, who is ill at the moment, but listening in and soaking up all the knowledge. And kia ora koutou, ko Iona Panat, taku ingoa. I am the chair of the committee and one of the councillors for Pukehino. Right. Who would like to speak first? What we're just basically giving people 5 minutes, and then there'll be lots of time for questions and discussion. Kate.
Oh yeah, no, I could go first.
Good on you.
I just reread my submission, and I haven't re-looked at the parts, you know, the alternatives in the district plan and things. So I wasn't sure about that part of my submission, but I just thought I'd address part of it, which is to do with donut economies and how a city can be a donut economy or circular economy, and especially in terms of addressing the climate emergency, which the City Council has acknowledged and declared for. And I just thought I'd say Amsterdam has become a donut city in terms of its economy. And I just put the city's purpose out there for everyone. The purpose of a city should be to a thriving, regenerative, inclusive city for all residents while respecting planetary boundaries. Amsterdam has decided that it won't, every output and input has to come to carbon zero. So say you get things from China which have a lot of pollution, you have to make sure that that is balanced by something that takes pollution away or is a negative. So that's quite a challenge to put forward. But alongside that, looking in a city purely in terms of its emissions is making sure that it's resilient, and as the world heats up, it has the ability to keep people cool. And I think things like concrete and various other things can be changed to become more cooling. Anyway, just throwing that out. I think I've probably done my 5 minutes, have I? Just about.
Sorry, I was taking notes. No, you haven't. I've got time.
Oh, okay.
Keep going.
Well,
keep going.
I mean, for instance, if you make public transport free.
Oh, have you frozen? Kate, are you there? Wonderful technology.
Layers of green, you know, like, I mean, you can change the whole landscape of the city to be greener and to make it more accessible. And so, you know, so there's things you can do if you just look at it from a completely different point of view and use that climate emergency lens for every single decision.
Okay, you don't want to talk about whether you feel the plan does that very well?
As I said, I haven't revisited the plan. I think that cities are almost locked into doing things the same as they have been done because the systems are set up to do that. And I think it's a real challenge to break free of that. Stop using concrete, for instance. I mean, who does that? What building goes up without concrete? But yet concrete causes a lot of emissions. And, you know, that's just a little tiny example of something that's hard to break free from because we've always done it. So I'm not addressing the plan as it is, but I'm just, although I have talked about it in my submission, but I just want to say it's time to think more and act boldly, think widely and laterally, and be flexible and adapt and mitigate climate, So that's my main message in terms of how the plan should look.
Very succinct. Thank you very much. Right, Maria, would you like to go next?
Thank you. I have two parts really. My entire backyard is designated a significant natural area under the proposed plan. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. I love the greenery of Ngaio. I bought a reserve. I'm part of a group that does predator-free, predator trapping in there. The locals all get in there and keep the tracks maintained and make sure all the rubbish is cleared up. So I think we're a community that really does care about the environment around us, and I think that's a very good thing. But the practicalities of a significant natural area and what it means to my drainage runs through. What does it mean to my retaining walls? What will it mean for my insurance? What will it mean for access? What will it mean for my gardening? What will I be able to repair? What can I maintain? All of those practical questions that you can talk about biodiversity, and I don't know anyone who would disagree with that, but I'm a landowner and I have responsibilities, and I'd like to know what it all means for that. And I also think there's a bit of a lost opportunity. Ngaio particularly, everyone's involved in the local community. They're out and about. There's a lot of people who do track maintenance, clear out all of the wild cherry trees that self-seed. But the engagement with people has been a little bit, probably a bit ad hoc. So we had a couple of letters. There wasn't anything to engage those groups that are already doing quite good work, and I think could have provided pretty interesting feedback on what it means to have a biodiverse city, a biophilic city, which we all want. So I just think there was a bit of a missed opportunity there. So I know I have a long list of questions that are quite practical, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Well, we've got Tim here to help you answer them later, so that's great. Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Iona. And thanks for taking the time to listen, particularly out of hours for most of you. We do appreciate that. And I'm not based in Wellington, so it was always going to be by Zoom. So it's nice that you're all there by Zoom too. Look, I was keen to submit because to me, it gave a personality to my submission. And it wasn't, I laughed at the irony of a white middle-class man complaining about my land being taken, or my land rights being taken. And I thought, hang on, how can you do that in New Zealand? But equally, it doesn't mean that I don't have the land rights. And so to me, it is worthwhile putting that personality on board. But I do take note that there is an irony in New Zealand talking about that. In fact, in all of the Commonwealth, pretty much. Look, my family owns some property in Kandala, and we too have more than half of the property has been deemed an SNA. We've had it reviewed, and it is still an SNA. And look, we could see why it was an SNA. We'd spent a lot of time planting native trees into that area, and it looks way better than when we bought the property 15 plus years ago. We're nature-loving people, so we were into planting those trees, and we bought those trees from Hawke's Bay, where I live now, to Wellington to plant, and they're thriving, as I say. It is a large section, and while we had no immediate plans to subdivide, we could see that there was potential for that in time. And I guess when I see the central government suggesting that we should be infill housing, and then the local government saying, well, you can't in your backyard, I kind of see the irony of that too. For me, I think that property rights are an important thing, and that we need to be equitable. You know, I look across the road, and there could be a house over there that's got a big backyard as well with native trees in it, and yet theirs may not be deemed an SNA because they don't border the same reserve. To me, that's not fair. To be fair, I haven't got the answer either of how to make it right, but it feels like there should be something like the Public Works Act or something along those lines. We'd be more than happy to look after that land if it was purchased off us by the council, for instance. That way, to me, it would be fair between the chap over the road and myself, because essentially we'd both be paying for that land through rates and the like. And then we'd both be able to enjoy it too, because it would be a reserve. So yeah, I guess overall my point is that we're very passionate about native bush. We like gardening. We love what we've got out in front of us, but we're concerned about the inequality of the SNA in the draft plan.
So succinct, thank you. And Paula, welcome. You there? There you go.
Yeah, I am, and apologies for being late. I was held up at work.
No problem. Are you ready to talk now? Is that another submitter finished?
Yes, I am.
Great.
So essentially, my submission was, as I recall, supporting broadly the direction that the plan was going in. We need much denser cities with better urban form, but we also need to make much better use of the green space between buildings, or the spaces between buildings to create green space. So I think that we can have our cake and eat it, if you like, if we design our cities well. So we can deliver good green space, we can deliver biodiversity, and we can also deliver denser housing. One of the ways we need to do that, obviously, is by reallocating road space to other uses and making better use of the space between buildings. And we also need to have much better design. I think we need to be careful about very blanket rules and recognise that how you manage different sites will be different. So that's broadly what I'd like to say on that.
Oh my goodness, how succinct. Right, I'm going to take the first question. Paula, given you're a big expert in biodiversity, what do you think about the SNAs? Because we've been talking about that a bit, and we'll get some questions answered from our submitters. Are you in support of them?
I'm certainly in support of the SNA concept. I think we have to recognise, and I'm actually currently working on the new RM system. And one of the things I'm looking at in that is the whole question of how you manage within limits and provide for biodiversity while still making sure that there can be developments. One of the things that we need to recognise is that offsetting is all very well for some values, but it doesn't work for a lot of the things that are out there. We are not in a position to replace complexes of native soil organisms that are living in remnants that have not been cleared and put into exotic pasture. So you can have as much regeneration as you like, you can do all the planting you like, but you won't get those communities back again, as far as we know. So the study that was done in Waikato found that Kaikatea remnants, which had not remnants, regenerating bush, which had replaced pasture, did not have a lot of native large soil organisms in them. The beetles were exotic still. So if we don't keep the remnants that we've got, we will lose a lot of things that we don't even know how to measure. So we really need to make sure that we don't work on the assumption that we can get rid of the bit that is currently there and eventually we'll produce something else. We are simply not capable of doing that. And we need a good representative array of what we originally had, because a lot of the small biodiversity that nobody takes any notice of is highly patchy in the environment. So it's very fussy about the microhabitats it lives in, and because they're not mobile, most soil organisms don't have a winged form, then as far as we know, there's probably a lot of speciation where, you know, what is in the Āmua Valley may be entirely different to what is in Zealandia. So we need to be making sure that we're retaining all those little remnants at quite a fine scale across the city. We can't assume that having an outer town belt means that we don't need an inner town belt as well. Does that help?
I'll let Jill go to a question, then I'd like to explore that just a little bit more. Thanks.
Kia ora. My pathway is also about the SNAs, because we've heard obviously a lot about SNAs over the last few days with the submissions. And Maria, I found your submission very helpful because you could sort of articulate, I guess, what some of your concerns are around, the outcome if you have an SNA designation on your land. We've been told by one of our submitters the other day that actually Wellington City Council has done quite a good job with this process. There have been other councils that has really, the process hasn't gone well. But I'm just wondering from your perspective, and actually Phil and Paula, you will have a perspective on this as well, it's what we can do to help people come on board. Seems to be that part of this is about the process and the way that you do it, but also how the effect on people's potential, or, how we look at our land, because a lot of people have said, well, I really like my trees, but I don't want you to tell me that they're special. Like it's sort of, we've got into a very unusual debate, and I just wonder if you've had any thoughts about, a lot of people are really proud of their backyards that are beautiful. As actually Maria shared early on, this is something you take pride in. So I just sort of wonder how we make sure we don't lose that in the process and help people feel, feel that they're brought on that journey, and that there is, they're not going to be horrible surprises along the way.
That's a great question, and one I've thought a lot about. I talked to all my neighbours when this first happened, and because it wasn't clear, I think there was a lot of distrust. And in that vacuum, people made up their own minds. And I've been to, I'm sure you have too, the meetings at the Kandala, and you've got people who are very, very proud of the work that they've put in. And all of a sudden it sort of feels like, oh, well, maybe you're not doing it well enough. And I think that particularly is hard when it's the communities looking after the reserves as well. And that's not, that's because we want to, not because for any other reason. But I think the SNA, the idea behind it, I can understand, but the way an SNA has to be put in place, and it's why some councils have backed away, it is an us and them. And I think you lose that ability to have a partnership with people who probably know their own backyards better and must be feeling like, what do you know about my backyard? It's really interesting. I had a discussion where, like, what is Indigenous to Ngaio? I don't actually know. I should find out, but I don't know. But it leads to a lot of questions. And actually, if that was the discussion, what are the trees you should be planting? How can we have the reserves bordering our backyard in a way that it's seamless for the animals, the native animals that need to be here? Like, I don't know. I think SNA itself is flawed because it does put a council in an us and them position. So I don't know that I can answer your question, and apologies for that.
Yeah, look, from my perspective, I think you've got bad timing, big time. You've got the central government telling us to get jabbed, even if we want to get jabbed, so that annoys people. And now you're telling us to do something as well. So it feels like there's another layer, and that just gets people's back up. And look, I'm the same as the other two responders that are supporting of the idea of it. But I spoke to Tim, and I felt like I wanted to cut this stuff down before the law changed. But I'd spent 15 years growing it all. That's ridiculous. But I'm still not going to be told what to do by a council. So, that's the sort of juxtaposition that I can feel myself in, and I shouldn't have to feel like that.
Paula, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in how to do these processes. I can tell you what the ecological outcomes are if you don't predict things. I would also say that the law is quite clear that changing the use and condition of a property beyond a certain point is actually a privilege. It's not a right which is being taken away. It's a privilege which is being defined. And that needs to be remembered in all of these processes. So, you know, that's been common law way back, and it's always been the law in New Zealand. So I think there needs to be recognition on both sides that the purpose of a district plan needs to be to shape the future of the district and to make sure that all the land uses fit together collectively to deliver a good outcome for New Zealand. And if everybody tackles it as, you know, this is my apartment and I'll do what I like, and I you know, I don't need to worry about a building at consent, and you know, why should I have to comply with a health notice because the council doesn't like the mess out the back or something, you know, then we just don't have a community. So the district plan needs to be a community process, but it is also a legal process. And you can't entirely make a legal process a happy, collaborative exercise for everybody. At the end, somebody has to make a legal decision.
That's helpful, thank you. Now, is it Tore or Tor?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, it's Tori.
Tori,
I was
okay.
Peter's grandmother. And I'm sorry I was late to join. I had, my internet went down and I only just managed to get it back up.
All good. Would you like to just say your 5 minutes piece now? We're just starting to talk about SNAs, but you want to hear what you want to say.
Thank you. I would like to comment specifically on how the draft district plan affects the area around Hay Street. So I'm a resident of Hay Street in Oriental Bay. So I'd like to first talk about what my biggest concerns are, and then talk about how I think those changes would affect the largest number of people in Wellington, in that order. My particular concern is I think that the draft district plan is, in a sense, thrown a blanket over the area around Hay Street. And my biggest point is I think it would be really good if the plan could be more, do some site-specific analysis, because there's quite a lot of differences in the properties there. And I'll sort of explain why I think that's important. My main concern is really with health and safety. The first of those is really arises from shared use of a big long driveway that's part of this proposed plan. This is a driveway that our house is on. It's owned by close to a dozen houses. And the thing about it is there's no footpath. There's no parking on the side. It's really narrow. And so cars go up and down, people walk up and down, and the people walking have to kind of squeeze over to the edge if a car goes. And it's worse than that because it's about 150 meters long and there's no turning at the end. And so that means that cars will usually reverse one way or the other. So you've got people walking up and down, cars reversing up and down with no sort of footpath or area to get off the side in quite a bit of it. And there's a bit of a blind corner. Now we have a 10-year-old daughter, and a couple of houses up, our neighbors have a 10-year-old son. So, you know, think about this 10-year-old boy riding his bike to school, and, you know, if there's a car, he can get off and push it, but there's not much room on either side. So it's sort of an existing issue, safety issue. And our concern is that one side of the drive, the downhill side, is proposed to have the height restriction lifted so apartment buildings could go in. And what that would do would be to increase what I'd like to refer to as joint use of this one-lane narrow driveway between pedestrians and vehicles. Even if all those people became pedestrians, there are more pedestrians that would be at the risk of being knocked over by existing vehicles. So my main concern is really health and safety, intensifying this mixed use of a very narrow one-lane drive with no turning. If I step back and say, what are the other health and safety concerns? Hay Street itself is quite narrow, and there's a narrow patch where if a bank slipped, it's got quite a steep bank next to it, emergency vehicles couldn't get beyond that point. Now, the risk of that's pretty low, but if there was a big earthquake, that's the kind of event that would be likely to trigger a slip there. And that's the sort of event where it would be really important to get emergency vehicles, whether they be fire engines or ambulances, and they'd be completely cut off. Now, if people are not badly injured and they can kind of walk there, fine. But if anyone has disability issues or is made disabled because of something fell on them in an earthquake or whatnot, they're kind of trapped up here with no way for emergency vehicles to get up the drive. So that kicks in and opposite, I believe, house number 15, property number 15 on Hay Street. So those are my two main concerns, which are health and safety related. Now, the link to the district plan, my understanding is objective 1 of the national policy statement and covers health and safety, and some natural hazard issues are covered under the section 6 of the RMA. But I think probably they mostly, particularly on the drive, would come under the 3.2 other category. Also under that category is a sort of separate set of concerns, which I think really comes to sort of the impracticality of putting very large apartment buildings in certain places, certainly not all places, but certain places. So for example, on that drive I was talking about, that it's right on the edge of a very steep drop-off. And the houses that are proposed to have the higher height limit are the ones right up on the edge of the steep drop-off. And so I think it's just impractical to have buildings that large and that heavy right on the edge of what's virtually a cliff. Right now there are houses there, but I think that the challenge of putting a big, large building on the edge of a cliff are quite different. And there are a few other houses on Hay Street where there are steep banks, on the east side, and some of them have walk-ups to them. And so just the practicalities of getting the heavy equipment up there to do the site strengthening and whatnot, makes it quite impractical. And there is that access issue here, because this drive is a shared drive. It's the only access for a bunch of houses. And if a big apartment was put in here, apartment building, how would that work and still let people take the kids to school or catch airplanes or whatever they need to do to get up and down the drive? So there's a kind of practicality issue, which I think also comes under that section 3.2 other, which overlaps with what I think is the more overriding concern of the health and safety issue for some of the houses.
That's very clear. Thank you. The time's sort of up, so we're just we'll go back to questions and discussion. Thank you for that. It's really helpful. Now, I'm just wondering if we could, Kate, are you there? Move back to donor economics.
Hi.
Which will be so great. But how would you sort of make that doable in a district plan, which is obviously an RMA instrument?
Sure. So I'm not an expert on donut economies. You need to read Kate Raworth, who's the English academic who developed that model. And I think it would be, there'd be many sort of facets to it, because when you're building, as I said, with cement as an example, when you're building structures, whatever they end up looking like, if they're multi-family residences and big apartment blocks or whatever they are, you'd be choosing materials that don't cause emissions when they're made and don't cause emissions, for instance, like cement does when it's drying. So that's just one thing. But, and by the way, I've got my video off because my Wi-Fi is terrible. So if I freeze, don't be surprised. And I have something like, there's some discussion around the airport having another runway. Well, in a donut economy, you'd have to balance the emissions of more flights coming in and out by not having emissions somewhere else. So you'd have to work out whether that's even possible, you know. So it is complicated, but if you want, you know, we have to live the
We've lost you, Kate. You back?
Frozen. Okay, I don't know what I froze at, but we have an overshoot day where we've used up all our available emissions budget, and that in New Zealand I think happens at the end of May. So the rest of the year is all too many emissions. So living within the planetary boundaries is something that every country needs to do, must do, and that looking at the district plan in terms of the climate emergency, I'm just broken recording that, as you probably noticed, but it's just has to be part of the equation. And if you look at something like, yeah, I don't know what the term is, but areas of natural beauty or significant natural whatever, of course, that is anything that's put aside and allowed to be a green space is going to give you points on the positive balance sheet, you know. So I think we all agree that that's a good idea, but that's just one aspect. So you have to sort of go through all the points in the district plan and actually evaluate them in terms of where they put the city in terms of a positive or negative carbon or emissions budget. So yeah, it's a very complicated thing, but I'm just assuming that the council's already got people working on this because they've declared a climate emergency, and that means that everything's looked through the lens of the climate emergency.
Great stuff. Thank you. Give us food for thought. The three councillors here, we're very sympathetic. Tim, can we use your expertise now to maybe just answer a few questions around SNOs, because it's been obviously just quite difficult understanding what you can and can't do. And Tori, we will get back to you definitely. So yeah, sure. just to provide a bit of an overview.
Yep, no, I can do that. And Phil, I'm really sorry if after you spoke to me you felt like taking out all your SNO. Might have been having a bad day or not doing my job very well, but no, apologies for that. Look, you know, this balance between protection and practical use is really tricky. We've tried to accommodate it, so apologies, Maria, hidden away on page 465 of the district plan, or whatever page. There are some permitted rules, so you can clear within a certain distance of your house, 3 metres. That's so you can maintain it and allow sunlight into your windows. You can clear vegetation for driveways and footpaths. If a tree is dying and about to fall on your house, you can remove it. So look, there are certainly some permitted rules. It's not a no-go area. It's not, this is locked up, don't touch it. But you're right, there is some protection there that doesn't exist at the moment. So in the draft plan, we've tried to find that balance of protection and practical use, but we've heard a lot of submissions that they're still too rigid. So we are looking at trying to build in some more flexibility a bit around those rules. Again, we're not looking at reversing the protection, but what else can we do to help people maintain their properties without needing to go through resource consent? So councillors will be coming back to you probably in a couple of weeks with some suggestions and recommendations for how we can change those rules. So I guess watch this space in terms of, you know, allowing for a little bit more flexibility. Probably the other thing to say is we're also keen to adopt some kind of incentives that sit alongside the SNAs, but we want to work, well, we have to work with the councillors about what that package might look like. So we appreciate the rules is only one way to protect, but rules in itself don't actually improve. So again, we want that working with landowners to try and make it better and easier for people to make it better, and it's not just about having a rule book. Do you want me to, is that enough on SNAs for now? I can probably...
Yeah, shall we have some questions from Phil and Maria in particular?
Thanks, Tim, and it certainly wasn't anything personal, mate. And look, it would upset me immensely to cut them down, so that's why I'm here, hoping that there's another way. I guess the question that I had is there precedent for the SNAs in New Zealand, and how's it how's it worked out? Or are we trying to be cutting edge where maybe we're better to let someone else trip over first and we can then work out the good and the bad?
No, again, it's a really good question, because there has been a lot of pushback against these, and that they're unlawful and we shouldn't be doing it. I can tell you there's other councils throughout the country that have gone through this process, gone through a plan change and brought in very similar rules. They're not all identical. Different councils take different approaches, but the Auckland Unitary Plan has, there are another name, significant something areas, but it's the same thing, protecting biodiversity. Kapiti Coast just recently went through a plan change process, and they now have adopted significant natural area rules. Pūroro is going through a hearings process at the moment. So certainly we're not the first. Other councils have gone through this before us.
Maria, do you have any questions?
I do. I did read page 465, I'm ashamed to admit. I did do a find. I searched the document first, I will say that. Hey, look, and I really do appreciate that overview. Can you talk a little bit more? I suppose I'm worried about the risk as a homeowner, what it might mean for my insurance and things like erosion. I live on a very steep section. There's a gully at the bottom. What does it mean for, like, I will take proactive steps for erosion and insurance and mortgages, and whether there's any detail on those aspects?
Yeah, look, I probably can't comment too much on the insurance side of things, but yes, you can replant within SNA. So if you need to plant for erosion purposes, that's fine. I guess it's more the question if possibly if erosion is happening, what quick remediation can you do to fix it, and would you need resource consent? Now, there are permitted rules around dealing with hazards. I don't believe they go as far as erosion. So I think that's, again, a really valid point to make, that maybe we need to look beyond what we've got at the moment is things like fire risk and the threat of a tree falling on someone if it's in, but we haven't gone as far as dealing with erosion. So look, that's a valid point, and I'll make sure I follow through on that with, as I said, looking through at what else we need to cover in these changes.
Tori, can we go to you? So I know Hay Street really well, and obviously there's lots of streets in Wellington where the topography is really tricky. Do you just want to talk a little bit about how we deal with all those steep streets, just given they are common, and that we have earthquakes and climate change coming, and we need housing?
Yeah, so, I fully accept the need for housing and the need for housing within walking distance of the city. I mean, we all need to keep our carbon footprint down. I believe in that. I've become a vegan largely for that reason. But I guess what I'm saying is, within a steep street, not all houses within that street are the same. So that's what I mean by the site-specific analysis. I'm not saying put a cross through a steep street, but if you've got a street that would be blocked off above a certain point, if a bank slipped in an earthquake, it might not be appropriate to put greater density of people above that point. You've got a driveway that goes off the street. It's got some very specific issues to do with people and cars commingled. Is it appropriate for the houses on that driveway to turn into apartments? So it's just a case of, on Hay Street, there are some places that are steep. Some of them have good access, and with enough money, the site work could be done to put an apartment building. There are other places where there's just a walk-up access. So I guess what I'm saying is, go through property by property and work out whether it's appropriate to put an apartment building there specific to that, to those circumstances. I mean, there are some general issues about, if you advocate for Wellingtonians generally, most people who go to Oriental Bay don't live in Oriental Bay. They're people who use the beach and walk up and down the parade. And I think, the issues of what does that look like, the aesthetics of it, whether you see a lot of high-rise buildings or whether you see the existing thing, that affects the largest number of people. But some of these more specific concerns that affect, the residents are quite specific within Hay Street.
Good, thank you. Jill, do you have some questions?
Lots of things floating around in my head, but nothing I can form into a question that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I don't know. I guess the SNA situation is one that's really, I guess, top of mind, because we have heard a lot of feedback about that, and it has been. I found this conversation probably one of the most helpful, because we've got really constructive, diverse feedback, which is really helpful. Yeah, I can't really think of a question that it's probably quick to answer. Sorry.
Paula, we did declare an ecological emergency along with our climate one. Can you just talk a little bit at a strategic level whether we've done enough in the biodiversity space?
Sorry.
No. So, yes, we have a biodiversity emergency, and I don't think anybody has really understood how big it is. 99% of our biodiversity we know nothing about at all. So New Zealand has one of the highest rates of known threatened species, but that's vertebrates largely, and obvious things that can be assessed like vascular plants. We don't even know what fungi we have. So my memory of the figures is that we've named a couple of thousand fungi, and we think there's probably 21,000 species in New Zealand. A recent survey of dead logs from Cyclone Eta found that, apart from armillaria, which was everywhere, almost all the fungi on the logs were only present on one log. So they surveyed 82 logs, and what they found were a whole lot of species that are very, very patchy in the environment. And that are very fussy. They're either just turning up in odd places, or they're very fussy about where they are. We know absolutely nothing about those species. We know very little about fungal gnats, for which New Zealand is the global hotspot. We know very little about springtails. And the only way that we can stop those species disappearing off the planet is by keeping their habitats. We can't do a species recovery plan for them because we don't even know what they are. We do have good evidence that a lot of those species will hang on in degraded remnants in urban areas. And that if you then stop the degradation process and maintain the Indigenous cover, that they will generally recover their populations and survive. So, that's the basic science of it. The other aspect of biodiversity is how we put back together a lot of the systems. So water sensitive urban design, absolutely critical for our urban streams. And I think that we're underestimating the win-win possibilities out there. We can't afford to keep building bigger pipes because people put more impervious surfaces in. And there's no particular excuse for creating impervious surface and running water straight into urban streams when we should have water harvesting on every building. Wellington City has a water sensitive urban design strategy that was worked on years ago, and the district plan as it's currently drafted doesn't really reflect it. It doesn't have a good way of saying, actually, in every catchment, we cannot afford to have more than somewhere between 7 and 10% of the water that comes down as rain goes straight into streams without going through a stormwater garden or some other system, because the flashiness problem just destroys your biodiversity. When they daylighted Waterview, the stream at Waterview in Auckland, there was a study done before and a study done afterwards, and there was no improvement in MCI at all, because the same dirty water was running through the streets and into the stream, and the organisms were actually reasonably happy in pipes, the ones that had survived. Their problem was a combination of flashiness and pollution coming from that water. we need a very radical change in the way in which we manage our natural systems, the way that water moves through the city, and the way in which we deal with issues like clearing of vegetation. I'm feeling bitter and twisted again today, be warned, because again, Fulton Hogan have dumped their road signage stuff on top of my plants after I complained about them doing it a few weeks ago. It's all, there's a lot of that sort of thing where we have all these green spaces and we have species in them that have survived. So, my restoration project just down the hill in the middle of Wellington City has ground wetters, stick insects, and giant native earthworms, despite everything that Transit's bulldozers attempted to do to that site. But we don't respect it as an important site, and we don't have our systems to make sure that we look after it. And so the whole issue of how you deal with the cumulative effects, the beneficial effects of a lot of little things that people do, and the negative effects of all the little bits. Why does it matter if I concrete my driveway? Well, it matters. And the district plan somehow has to manage those cumulative effect problems. And yep. I'm not sure that any council has quite managed to crack that one, but perhaps Wellington would like to be the first.
We would love to. Now, Maria, sorry, we're nearly out of time. Have you just got a point? Thank you, Paula. That was incredibly valuable. So I've got lots of notes.
Sorry, I'll be very quick. I just found what Paula was saying very interesting, but I'm interested in the tension between build and the need for more housing and the significant natural areas, which are just designating ground that's already green and already well looked after. So there seems to be a natural tension between those two things. And I take Phil's earlier point where people have offered to provide land and green spaces back to the council, and maybe that hasn't been the way forward. But I'm interested in council's view on the disconnect between those two options.
I think that's a good question, what we're trying to deal with. So that's helpful. Look, we are out of time now. Councillors are coming back. That was an incredibly useful conversation, public submitters. Thank you. Really helped clarify and gave us lots of good new ideas. Sorry, Liam. Got to incorporate some more stuff in there. We'll see if we can get donut economics on Kate. And definitely that ecological aspect too. We might need to beef that up. So thank you very much. The feedback will be taken on board. We really are trying to grapple with all of these issues. So I hope you have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Omarie.
Omarie.
Right. Hopefully we'll get our people back. Hi, Terry. Did you hear Paula talking? Yeah, good. Yeah, it was useful.
I'm going to say, Terry, it's worth going back and watching that one because Paula shared some really interesting information around the particularly fungi and some of that sort of biodiversity that we don't know a lot about. You really enjoy listening to it.
Oh, jealous. Likewise, we had lots of very cool korero around air noise pockets in our stream. But I'm sure you're all familiar with Glen Kingston in Strathmore. It's quite the local. It's good.
Very good. All right. Yes, we are still live. So
yeah, I think I have about a page of notes. Iona, you were saying you've taken lots of notes from Paul. I think I have about a page of notes from Glenn talking about the air noise boundaries. So.
Right. Well, I think you'll need to educate us. Maybe you do your own session.
Yeah. Sarah Free and I are all over it. Yeah. Okay,
right.
There's so much detail.
Well, the question is how we're going to incorporate all this amazing feedback. And so that will be tricky.
I think a few people might be headed to room 4, which was what was in our copy-paste agenda from Haiti, which says at 4:05 you need to come back to this room. I remember that this was the original one, so that might be where others are.
That's because you're a star hearing, really.
Oh, just because I did it accidentally earlier.
Hi, Diane. Welcome back.
I think it might take a little bit of time for people to get here, Iona.
Because they're still talking, or because they're just coming from the wrong room?
Yeah, because it wasn't terribly clear what the link for the main beginning and end. Well, at least it wasn't to me.
Okay. I think, yeah, it was sent out, but maybe we're moving around a lot.
Yeah, there were a lot of unfortunately, it got a bit complicated because we decided to have the the acknowledgement of the 15th of March. So I think that added a little bit of a layer of complexity. But however, here we are.
How many councillors were there in other meetings?
Councillor Wolf was in ours.
Okay.
Everybody from my room is now here.
Okay, yeah. Same. This was away.
We have quorum on 8. We could just do it.
Who was chairing the other?
It's Laurie's room. That's not. Oh no, Councillor Calvert's here, but Fleur, and Laurie and Simon, maybe they've had to go.
We do have a quorum, I think.
We do, but maybe if we just wait for that room to come back and then.
Simon wasn't in our room.
Simon was in our room, but he'd only just rejoined, and I'm not sure he would have. Yeah.
I think Fleur's saying she can't get in, so I don't know what link she's using.
Are you able to?
She needs to try the table 1 link rather than at the top of the run sheet. At the top of the run sheet, there's a link that says "come back to this one," but actually the one you need is the table 1 link.
Try that.
This information brought to you by me clicking on the wrong link at 4 o'clock.
And I saw Terry briefly appear in our room.
This is what I mean, Iona. No credit to me.
Done exactly the was attached to the words around the 15th of March.
Yeah, and that's the one I used.
Yeah,
the one that Haiti sent us the latest email.
Yeah. Well done, everybody, for finding your way around. That's navigating's pretty challenging.
It's got a Harry Potter-like feel to it, doesn't it?
There's a little bit of that. Especially when you appear and disappear into a particular room when you're in the wrong one.
Are we recording at the moment?
Yeah, we are. So I'll just So text Laurie, just see. Oh, Simon can't rejoin the meeting. Oh dear.
I think they had the wrong link for the room one.
Sorry, Jenny, have you got the link so that you could send it just to the others quickly?
Can somebody maybe forward the last email from Haiti? That's nice and uncomplicated.
Yeah, I can do that. I've forwarded it to Fleur, so I can forward it to Simon as well.
Oh, thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Simon and Laurie probably, eh?
Yep.
Okay, we'll see if that works. Looks like Fleur's in, so it didn't work.
Yeah, thanks.
Just sent it
And you
to
realise
Simon
it's
and Laurie.
getting dark during the meeting. You need to turn the light on. Go on, it looks very dark.
We don't normally still have
Right,
meetings at 8
sorry.
o'clock, obviously.
Here you go, we're nearly there.
Iona, should we just do it now that we've got a few more councillors?
So Simon's just, let's just wait. And has Laurie come back?
Because is it just to receive the information?
Yeah, I just didn't want to.
Simon and Laurie here now.
There we go. Okay, good. All right. So, Heidi, are you just able to put up the recommendations? Thank you so much. All right. So obviously, I'm going to move those, and Councillor Paul will second, and just the deepest, most grateful thanks to the submitters. We got so much out of it. Like, it was amazing. So many notes. I want to thank the staff for their dedication. They've done an enormous amount of work. And of course, our star, Haiti Mueller, for doing all the organisational work to make this actually happen. So look, I just loved being able to have public there talking to council officers and councillors. I think it worked really well. So a big thanks to councillors too, of course, who have spent many hours now sitting, listening. Councillor Paul, I presume you probably don't want to say anything at the moment.
I will just briefly, if you can hear me. Yeah,
of course.
Cool.
Of course.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum, kia ora koutou. Hey, I just want to say a really big thanks to you, Councillor Pennant, for your cheering over the last week. It's been really good and testing as well, managing your own demands and looking after your own health and well-being. So thanks for being a great chair. Just wanted to echo your thanks to Haiti, and a special thanks to Emily Deans for helping us out on Tuesday with the forums. And just a quick thanks to the planning team as well for all of their help for pulling this all together. So yeah, kia ora koutou.
Wonderful. All right, can you all vote now, please?
There's 12 votes in favour, carried unanimously.
Wonderful. So Atina Kuramutu Tahui. I declare the meeting closed, and we'll now do the karakia. Unahia, 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 kuta uru tapunui, kia watia, kia mama, te nākau te tinana, te warua, e te arutakutu, koe rā e ronga, whakaria ki ronga, kia watia, kia watan. Great. See you tomorrow.